The Forgotten Duchess. When a woman scorned becomes the salvation of a cursed house. They said she was nothing more than a transaction, a desperate girl sold to save a bankrupt family. They whispered she would never thaw the frozen heart of the Duke of Ashford, a man whose soul died with his first wife. But what they didn't know was that Lady Eleanor Hawke possessed something far more dangerous than beauty or breeding. An unbreakable will and a mind sharp enough to unravel the darkest secrets of England's most powerful family. In the harsh winter of 1847, in a manner where grief had turned to poison, one woman would dare to challenge a system built on silence and suffering. This is her story. A tale of courage against cruelty, love against loss, and truth against a conspiracy that could destroy them all. Stay with us until the very end to discover how a marriage born of desperation became a revolution of the heart. Hit that like button and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The carriage wheels ground against the frozen gravel of Ashford Manor's circular drive, each rotation marking another second of Eleanor's vanishing freedom. Through the frost-laced window, she watched the great house emerge from the December fog like a monument to sorrow, all gray stone and shuttered windows, its towers clawing at a colorless sky. No warmth emanated from those walls. No welcome. Just the oppressive weight of a place where joy had been buried long ago. "It's not too late, Eleanor." Her father's voice was barely a whisper, thick with shame. Lord Edmund Hawke had aged a decade in the past 6 months. The gambling debts, the failed investments, the scandal, all of it had carved deep lines into his once handsome face. "We could turn back. I could find another way." Eleanor turned from the window, forcing steel into her spine. At 22, she had expected a different future, one filled with love matches at country dances, laughter in sunlit gardens, perhaps even a marriage of genuine affection. Instead, she was being delivered to Ashford Manor like goods purchased on credit. "There is no other way, Papa. You know that as well as I do." She kept her voice steady, though her gloved hands trembled in her lap. "The Duke has paid our debts. The scandal is buried. My younger sisters can still make decent matches. This was always going to be the price." Her father looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "He's a hard man, Eleanor. Cold. They say he hasn't smiled since Lady Catherine died 3 years ago. He has no interest in a wife, only in producing an heir to satisfy his family obligations. Then I shall give him what he wants and ask for nothing in return." The lie tasted bitter, but Eleanor had become skilled at swallowing bitter things. "I've made my peace with it." But peace was the last thing she felt as the carriage lurched to a stop. The great doors of Ashford Manor opened, and a severe-looking butler descended the steps, his face as welcoming as the gargoyles perched on the roofline. "Lady Eleanor Hawke," he announced with all the warmth of a funeral director. "His Grace will receive you in the blue drawing-room. Lord Hawke, you will wait in the entrance hall." Eleanor's father gripped her hand one final time. "Be strong, my darling girl." She squeezed back, then released him, stepping out into the biting wind. The manor loomed above her, and for a moment she felt like a sacrifice being led to an altar. The butler, Mr. Graves, she would later learn, led her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. High ceilings swallowed sound. Portraits of stern-faced Ashford ancestors glared down with judgment. The very air felt heavy, as though the house itself was mourning. The blue drawing-room was aptly named. Everything from the damask wallpaper to the velvet curtains existed in shades of cold azure and slate. And there, standing before an unlit fireplace with his back to the door, was the Duke of Ashford. He didn't turn when she entered. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that seemed to reverberate through the floorboards. Mr. Graves retreated silently, closing the door with an ominous click. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had seen the Duke only once before, at Lady Harrington's ball where their engagement had been announced. Even then, surrounded by London's glittering society, he had seemed removed, untouchable, a man carved from ice rather than flesh. Now, in the intimacy of this private room, his presence was overwhelming. Finally, he turned. The Duke of Ashford was not conventionally handsome in the way of the young lords who had once courted Eleanor at country assemblies. He was something far more formidable, Tall and broad-shouldered, he possessed the build of a man who had seen military service, though his title had kept him from such pursuits. His dark hair was shot through with premature silver at the temples. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled her. Gray as a winter storm, they looked at her with such profound emptiness that Eleanor felt as though she were being appraised by a man who had forgotten how to truly see another human being. "You're younger than I expected," he said without preamble. "How old are you?" 22, Your Grace." Catherine was 19 when we married. His jaw tightened, but she had been prepared for the role of Duchess since birth. "You are the daughter of a minor baron with more debts than prospects." "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, what qualifies you to become the Duchess of Ashford?" The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that Eleanor felt her cheeks burn, but she had not come this far to crumble at the first assault on her dignity. "Nothing qualifies me, Your Grace," she replied, lifting her chin, "except that I am here, and I have agreed to this marriage. If you require aristocratic pedigree, you should have chosen differently. If you require obedience and discretion, I can provide both. What I cannot provide is an apology for circumstances neither of us chose." Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes, surprise, perhaps, or irritation. It was impossible to tell. "You have spirit. Catherine had spirit too, before this house broke it." He turned back to the fireplace, dismissing her with his posture. "The marriage will take place in 1 week, as agreed. You will meet my daughters tomorrow afternoon. They are 6 and 8 years old, and they have been raised to understand that displays of emotion are vulgar. I expect you to maintain that standard." "You expect me to mother them without warmth?" Eleanor couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "I expect you to guide them in the manners and accomplishments required of young ladies of rank. Nothing more. They had a mother. She is gone. You are not her replacement." "Then what am I, Your Grace?" He turned again, and this time his gaze was sharp as a blade. "You are a necessity, a means to an end. My family requires that I remarry and produce an heir. You require financial security and social rehabilitation for your family. We each provide what the other needs. There is no romance in this arrangement, Lady Eleanor. Do not deceive yourself into believing otherwise." Eleanor felt something harden inside her chest, a determination forged in humiliation. "I have no such illusions, Your Grace, but I would ask one thing of you." "What is that?" "Do not lie to me. If this is to be a marriage of convenience, let it at least be an honest one. I can bear coldness. I can bear indifference. What I cannot bear is false pretense." For the first time, something almost like respect crossed the Duke's features. "Very well. I will not lie to you. In return, I expect you to honor the terms of our arrangement. You will be the Duchess in public, performing all required duties. In private, you will keep to your own chambers and affairs. We will not share a bed except when necessary for the production of an heir. Is that understood?" The clinical nature of his words should have horrified her. Instead, Eleanor felt only a strange sense of relief. At least she knew where she stood. "Perfectly understood, Your Grace. Then we have an accord." He pulled a velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a ring, a large sapphire surrounded by diamonds, beautiful and cold as the man offering it. "This was my mother's engagement ring. It will serve." He didn't ask for her hand, simply waited, as though even this small gesture of tradition was beneath him. Eleanor extended her left hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger with the efficiency of a man completing a business transaction. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. The Duke would have ensured that detail was managed properly. "You may explore the house and grounds as you wish," he continued. "Your chambers have been prepared in the East Wing. Dinner is served at 8 o'clock sharp. Tardiness is not tolerated. Mr. Graves will show you to your rooms. And my father has already been provided with refreshment and will be sent on his way within the hour. I see no purpose in prolonging farewells." The dismissal was absolute. Eleanor curtsied, a proper Duchess-worthy curtsy that her mother had drilled into her from childhood, and turned toward the door. "Lady Eleanor." She paused, glancing back. The Duke stood silhouetted against the window, a dark figure framed by weak winter light. "Do not expect me to change. This is what I am, what I will remain. If you hope to reform me through wifely devotion, abandon that hope now. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I have no intention of reforming you, Your Grace. I only intend to survive you. She didn't wait for his response, didn't need to see whether her words had struck home. She simply left, her spine straight and her head high, even as her heart raced with fear and fury in equal measure. Mr. Graves was waiting in the corridor, impassive as always. This way, my lady. Your chambers are quite comfortable, I assure you. As they walked through the endless corridors of Ashford Manor, Eleanor became aware of the silence. No servants gossiped in alcoves, no children's laughter echoed from distant rooms. Even their footsteps seemed muffled, as though the house itself demanded quiet. Mr. Graves, she ventured, how long have you served the Duke? 23 years, my lady, since he was a young man newly come into his title. Then you knew the late Duchess Catherine. The butler's pace didn't falter, but something in his posture stiffened. I did, my lady. What was she like? A long pause. When Mr. Graves finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of carefully chosen words. She was vivacious when she first arrived, full of light. The manner was different then. His grace was different. And what changed? They had reached a set of elaborately carved double doors. Mr. Graves opened them, revealing a suite of rooms decorated in shades of cream and gold, beautiful but impersonal as a hotel. Everything changed, my lady. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held a warning. Ashford Manor has a way of transforming those who dwell within it. I would advise you to guard yourself carefully. Before Eleanor could press for clarification, he bowed and departed, leaving her alone in her gilded cage. She walked slowly through the rooms, a sitting room, a bedroom with a canopied bed that could sleep four, a dressing room, and a small study. Everything was beautiful and cold, like the ring on her finger. Her trunks had already been unpacked by invisible servants, her meager possessions looking lost in the vast armoires and drawers. Eleanor sank onto the window seat, looking out over the frost-covered gardens. In the distance, she could see what appeared to be a frozen lake, and beyond it, dark woods that seemed to press in on the manor like a threatening army. This was her life now, this coldness, this isolation. But as she sat there, watching the winter sun sink behind the trees, Eleanor felt something kindle inside her. Not hope, exactly, but determination. The Duke had made his terms clear. He wanted a duchess who would perform her duties and ask for nothing more. Very well. She would be that duchess. But she would not be broken. Not by him. Not by this house. Not by the ghosts that clearly haunted these halls. Somewhere in this manor were two little girls, Emily and Sophia, who had lost their mother and been left with a father who had forgotten how to love. The Duke had forbidden emotional connection, but Eleanor had made no such promise. She would find a way. She always did. The next morning arrived with brutal efficiency. A maid, silent and efficient, entered at dawn to light the fire and lay out Eleanor's clothes. Breakfast was delivered to her room on a silver tray. Toast, eggs, tea, all perfectly prepared and utterly joyless. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mr. Graves appeared at her door. His Grace requests your presence in the nursery, my lady. The young ladies are expecting you. Eleanor followed him up 2 flights of stairs to the 3rd floor, where the children's quarters were located. The nursery was surprisingly warm and bright, the only room in the manor that seemed to hold any life. Toys were neatly arranged on shelves, books lined the walls. A rocking horse stood by the window, its paint worn by small hands. And there, seated side by side on a settee like 2 perfect porcelain dolls, were Emily and Sophia Ashford. Emily, the elder at 8, had her father's dark hair and serious gray eyes. Sophia, 6 years old, was fairer, with honey-colored curls and blue eyes that must have come from her mother. Both wore identical expressions of solemn wariness. Girls, Mr. Graves announced, may I present Lady Eleanor Hawke, who will soon be your stepmother and the Duchess of Ashford. Eleanor approached slowly, mindful of the way one might approach wild creatures, with respect and caution. She curtsied to them as she would to adults. Lady Emily, Lady Sophia, I'm honored to meet you. Emily's chin lifted. We are told you will be our new mother, but we already had a mother. We don't need another one. The words were delivered with her father's same cold precision, but Eleanor could hear the pain beneath them. These were children who had been taught to bury their grief, to present a proper face to the world even as their hearts broke. "You're quite right," Eleanor said gently, settling into a chair across from them. "You had a mother, and no one can replace her. I'm not here to try. Your mother was Lady Catherine, and she loved you very much. I could never take her place." Sophia's lower lip trembled, but she pressed it firm again. "Then why are you here?" "Because your father and I have made an arrangement. I will be his wife and the Duchess of this house. But as for you two, I hope we might simply be friends, if you'll allow it." "Father says displays of emotion are vulgar," Emily recited, as though repeating a catechism. "He says we must be proper young ladies at all times." Eleanor's heart ached for them. "And what do you say?" The question seemed to surprise them. No one, apparently, had ever asked their opinion on anything. "I say," Sophia began hesitantly, then stopped, glancing at her sister. "It's all right," Eleanor encouraged. "There's no wrong answer." "I say it's very hard," Sophia whispered, her eyes filling with tears she was clearly terrified to shed. "I miss Mama. I miss her so much. But Father says we mustn't speak of her because it causes him pain, and we mustn't cry because it's unseemly, and we mustn't laugh too loud or run in the halls or do anything that might disturb him. But Mama used to let us do all those things. She used to read us stories and play games and take us on picnics by the lake. And now everything is so quiet and sad, and I don't know how to make it better." The dam broke. Sophia began to cry in earnest, and Eleanor's instinct overcame her caution. She crossed to the settee and pulled the little girl into her arms, letting her sob against her shoulder. "Hush now, sweetheart. It's all right. You're allowed to miss your mama. You're allowed to cry." "Father will be angry," Emily said, though she too looked close to tears. "He'll say we've been undisciplined." "Then let him be angry with me," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm not a child he can scold. If your father takes issue with tears, he can address it with me directly." She held Sophia until the storm of grief passed, stroking her hair and murmuring soft reassurances. Emily watched with wide eyes, as though witnessing something both wonderful and terrifying. "Do you really mean it?" Emily asked quietly. "That we can be friends?" "I really mean it. Even though Father won't like it?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed since arriving at Ashford Manor. "Especially because your father won't like it. I've discovered I have a talent for doing things that displease dukes." For the first time, Emily's serious face cracked into something almost like a grin. "Will you tell us about our mother? The servants won't speak of her, and Father locked away all her portraits." "I never knew your mother," Eleanor admitted, "but I would very much like to hear about her from you. Will you tell me?" And so they did. For the next hour, Eleanor listened as Emily and Sophia painted a picture of Lady Catherine, a vibrant, loving woman who had filled Ashford Manor with music and laughter. They told her about picnics and puppet shows, about bedtime stories and secret gardens, about a mother who had made them feel cherished and safe. By the time Mr. Graves returned to fetch Eleanor for dinner, she had made a decision. The Duke of Ashford might want a cold, distant marriage and emotionally stunted daughters, but Eleanor had not agreed to that. She had agreed only to marry him and perform her duties as Duchess. How she chose to perform those duties was another matter entirely. Dinner that evening was a formal, frigid affair. The dining room could have seated 40. Instead, Eleanor and the Duke sat at opposite ends of a table so long she could barely see his face in the candlelight. They ate in silence, served by footmen who moved like ghosts. It wasn't until dessert was served that the Duke finally spoke. "I understand you spent the afternoon with my daughters." "I did, Your Grace." Mr. Graves reported that there was crying, excessive displays of emotion. Eleanor set down her fork carefully. "Sophia was grieving her mother. I comforted her. I fail to see how that constitutes excessive emotion. My daughters have been instructed in proper behavior. They know that such displays are inappropriate. They're children, Your Grace. Children who lost their mother and have been forbidden to mourn her. Do you truly believe that's healthy?" The Duke's eyes flashed with warning. "You have been in this house for one day, Lady Eleanor. Do not presume to lecture me on the raising of my own children." "I'm not lecturing you. I'm asking you a question." Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her pulse raced. Do you believe it's healthy to force children to suppress their grief? I believe it's necessary to teach them control. The world will not indulge their tears. Better they learn that now than be destroyed by it later. Or perhaps, Eleanor said quietly, we destroy them ourselves by teaching them that love and loss are things to be hidden away like shameful secrets. The Duke rose from his chair so abruptly that it scraped against the floor. You forget yourself, madam. This is my house, my family. You are here by arrangement, not by right. Do not confuse the two. Eleanor stood as well, refusing to be cowed. You're right, Your Grace. This is your house. But in 1 week, I will be the Duchess of Ashford, and those children will be in my care as much as yours. If you expect me to ignore their pain, you will be disappointed. For a long moment, they faced each other across the gleaming expanse of the table, the air crackling with tension. You will regret defying me, the Duke said, his voice low and dangerous. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded, but I will regret even more becoming the kind of woman who abandons children in need of comfort. If I must choose between your approval and my conscience, Your Grace, I choose my conscience. Every time. She curtsied, a gesture of formal respect that carried an edge of mockery, and left the dining room without being dismissed. Behind her, she heard the sharp crack of the Duke's fist striking the table. Let him rage, she thought, as she climbed the stairs to her lonely chambers. Let him throw his tantrums and make his threats. She had faced worse than an angry Duke. She had faced bankruptcy, scandal, and social ruin. She had watched her father weep with shame and her mother's health fail under the weight of worry. She would not be intimidated by a man who hid his own grief behind walls of ice and expected everyone around him to freeze as well. As she prepared for bed that night, Eleanor caught sight of herself in the mirror. The sapphire engagement ring glinted on her finger, heavy and cold. In a week, she would marry the Duke of Ashford in a ceremony designed for duty, not love. She would become a duchess, tied forever to a man who had made it clear he wanted nothing from her but heirs and obedience. But she would also become something else, a guardian to two little girls who desperately needed someone to fight for them. And fight she would, Eleanor promised her reflection, against the Duke's coldness, against this house's oppressive grief, against every force that tried to crush the life and love out of Emily and Sophia. The Duke of Ashford thought he had purchased a compliant wife. He was about to discover he had unleashed something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Outside her window, snow began to fall on Ashford Manor, covering its gray stones in white. But inside Eleanor's heart, something warm and fierce was beginning to burn, a determination that no winter, no matter how harsh, could ever extinguish. The battle for Ashford Manor had begun, and Lady Eleanor Hawke had no intention of surrendering. The wedding took place on a morning so cold that frost patterns had crystallized across the chapel windows like nature's own protest. Eleanor stood at the altar in a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to the Duke's mother, another hand-me-down, another reminder that she was merely filling a vacancy. The chapel was nearly empty. A handful of the Duke's relatives sat in the pews, their faces registering polite disapproval. Her own family had not been invited. The Duke himself stood beside her like a statue, his responses to the vicar's prompts delivered in a monotone that suggested he was mentally elsewhere. When the time came to place the wedding band on her finger, a simple gold circle that matched the sapphire engagement ring, his hand was steady and cold. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar intoned, his voice echoing in the sparse chapel. "You may kiss the bride." The Duke turned to her, his gray eyes flat and emotionless. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers for exactly 2 seconds, a gesture as perfunctory as signing a legal document. Then he straightened, offered her his arm, and led her back down the aisle without a word. Eleanor was now the Duchess of Ashford, and she had never felt more alone in her life. The wedding breakfast that followed was equally cheerless. The Duke's aunt, Lady Pemberton, a woman whose disapproval seemed etched into every line of her pinched face, made a point of asking Eleanor about her qualifications for managing a ducal household. "I understand your family experienced certain financial difficulties?" Lady Pemberton's voice dripped with false concern. "How unfortunate. Of course, managing Ashford Manor requires skills that go far beyond what one learns in a household of lesser means." "I'm certain I'll manage," Eleanor replied evenly, refusing to rise to the bait. Catherine was trained from birth for this role, Lady Pemberton continued, as if Eleanor hadn't spoken. She knew every tradition, every expectation. She made Ashford into the jewel of the county, such a tragedy that she— The woman paused, pressing a handkerchief to her dry eyes. Well, the past cannot be changed, but I do hope you won't attempt to alter Catherine's arrangements too drastically. The household staff are quite accustomed to her methods. The Duke said nothing, merely continued eating his breakfast with mechanical precision. His silence spoke volumes. He would not defend Eleanor, would not acknowledge her as anything more than the replacement she was. Lady Pemberton, Eleanor said quietly, I have no intention of erasing Lady Catherine's memory, but I am the Duchess now, and I will manage the household as I see fit. I hope I can rely on the staff's cooperation. Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed. How bold! I wonder if boldness will serve you well in this house, Your Grace. Catherine learned the hard way that defiance has consequences. Before Eleanor could ask what that cryptic statement meant, the Duke stood abruptly. The breakfast is concluded. My aunt will be departing shortly. Eleanor, you will meet with Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, this afternoon to review the household accounts. I expect you to familiarize yourself with your duties immediately. He left without another word, striding from the room as if fleeing a funeral, which, Eleanor supposed, was exactly how he viewed this day. That afternoon, Mrs. Holloway proved to be a woman of formidable efficiency and barely concealed hostility. She was perhaps 50, rail-thin, with iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. Her tour of the manor was delivered in clipped tones that made it clear she considered Eleanor an interloper. Lady Catherine preferred the menus to be planned a full week in advance, Mrs. Holloway explained as they stood in the cavernous kitchen. She consulted with the cook every Monday morning without fail. She also maintained strict standards for cleanliness. Any deviation from her methods was not tolerated. I see, Eleanor said. And what were her methods regarding the children's meals? Mrs. Holloway's mouth thinned. The young ladies take their meals in the nursery, as is proper. Lady Catherine believed children should be kept to their own quarters until they learn proper table manners. And how often did Lady Catherine visit the nursery herself? A pause. Her Grace was quite busy with household duties, Your Grace. That's not what I asked, Mrs. Holloway. The housekeeper's eyes flashed with resentment. Lady Catherine visited the children for precisely 1 hour each afternoon, from 3 to 4 o'clock. She maintained a schedule. Structure is essential for young minds. Eleanor thought of Emily and Sophia, those two lonely little girls starved for affection, limited to a single hour with their mother each day. I will be adjusting that arrangement. The children may join me for tea whenever they wish. They may also take their dinners in the small dining room rather than the nursery. His Grace will not approve. His Grace may take his concerns up with me directly, Eleanor interrupted. Is there anything else I need to know about the household? Mrs. Holloway's face had gone rigid with anger. Only that Lady Catherine ran this house perfectly. Every servant knew their place. Every room gleamed. Every meal was served precisely on time. She understood what it meant to be the Duchess of Ashford. She understood tradition. And yet, Eleanor said softly, Lady Catherine is gone, and I am here. I will do my best to honor her memory, Mrs. Holloway, but I am not her ghost. I am a living woman, and I will make living decisions. If you cannot accept that, we will have difficulties. The housekeeper's jaw worked as though she were swallowing bitter medicine. Will that be all, Your Grace? For now. Mrs. Holloway departed with a curtsy so stiff it bordered on mockery, leaving Eleanor alone in the corridor. She could feel the walls of Ashford Manor closing in around her. Not just the physical walls, but the invisible barriers of tradition, expectation, and the ghost of a woman she had never met, but whose presence filled every room. That evening, Eleanor made her first truly defiant decision. Rather than dining alone at the opposite end of that absurd table from her husband, she instructed the footman to set places for herself and the children in the small dining room. When Emily and Sophia appeared, escorted by their anxious governess, Miss Pritchard, they looked terrified. Father said we're to eat in the nursery, Emily whispered. He'll be very angry. Then let him be angry, Eleanor said, echoing her earlier words. Come, sit with me. Tell me about your day. The dinner was chaotic and wonderful. Sophia spilled her water twice. Emily forgot her table manners and spoke with her mouth full. They laughed. Actual, genuine laughter, when Eleanor told them stories about her own childhood misadventures. For 1 hour, the oppressive silence of Ashford Manor was broken by the sound of life. And then the Duke appeared in the doorway. The laughter died instantly. Emily and Sophia froze, their faces draining of color. Even Miss Pritchard looked ready to faint, but Eleanor forced herself to remain calm, to meet her husband's stormy gaze without flinching. "Children," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you were instructed to dine in the nursery." "I invited them to join me, Your Grace," Eleanor said before the girls could speak. "They are my stepdaughters. I wish to spend time with them." "They are not puppets for your entertainment. They have schedules, routines. Discipline requires consistency." Eleanor rose from her chair, placing herself between the Duke and the children. "They are not soldiers requiring drilling either. They are little girls who deserve warmth and family. What they deserve is proper upbringing, not the indulgence that leads to weakness." His eyes shifted to his daughters, and Eleanor saw them both shrink back. "Emily, Sophia, return to the nursery immediately. Miss Pritchard will supervise your remaining meal. You will not leave your quarters again tonight." "Your Grace," Eleanor began. "And you," the Duke continued, his attention snapping back to her like a whip, "will cease undermining my authority in my own home. If you cannot respect the structure of this household, you will take your meals in your chambers alone." He swept from the room, leaving a wake of cold fury. The children fled without looking back, and Eleanor stood alone beside the abandoned dinner, her hands shaking with rage and helplessness. This was her life now, this constant battle. And she had been the Duchess of Ashford for less than 12 hours. The days that followed established a brutal pattern. Eleanor would attempt small acts of warmth and normalcy, reading to the children before bed, allowing them to explore the gardens, encouraging their laughter. The Duke would discover these infractions and respond with icy reprimands and stricter rules. The household staff, loyal to Catherine's memory and terrified of the Duke's displeasure, watched Eleanor with barely concealed contempt. "Her Grace doesn't understand our ways," Eleanor heard one of the maids whisper to another as she passed in the corridor. "Lady Catherine would never have been so undisciplined," the other responded. "His Grace must be beside himself with regret." Eleanor pretended not to hear, but each comment was a small cut. She was failing as a duchess, failing to protect the children, failing to find any foothold in this hostile house. A week after the wedding, she found Emily crying quietly in the library, a small, forgotten room on the second floor that seemed to be the only place in the manor where the Duke never ventured. "What happened, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked gently, settling beside the girl on the window seat. Emily wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. "Father says we're not to call you anything except Your Grace. He says you're not our mother and we shouldn't forget our place." Eleanor's heart broke. "I don't need you to call me mother, Emily, but I would very much like to be your friend. Is that allowed?" "I don't know what's allowed anymore," Emily whispered. "Everything was so much easier when Mama was alive. She made Father smile. She made everything warm. And now it's all cold and hard, and I don't know how to fix it." "Oh, darling," Eleanor pulled the girl into her arms. "It's not your job to fix your father. That's not your burden to carry. But if we were better, if we were more perfect, maybe he wouldn't be so sad and angry all the time." The words gutted Eleanor. These children had internalized their father's grief as their own failure. They believed they were responsible for his happiness, and because they couldn't restore it, they had concluded they were inadequate. "Listen to me, Emily," Eleanor said fiercely, holding the girl's face in her hands. "Your father's pain is not your fault. Do you understand? Adults carry their own griefs, and children should never have to bear that weight. You and Sophia are perfect exactly as you are, smart and kind and brave. Don't let anyone, not even your father, convince you otherwise." Emily's tears came harder then, and Eleanor held her through the storm. When Sophia appeared in the doorway, drawn by her sister's sobs, Eleanor gathered her in as well, and the three of them clung to each other in that forgotten library while the winter wind howled outside. It was there that Miss Pritchard found them an hour later, her face pale with fear. "Your Grace, His Grace has requested your presence in his study immediately. He is most displeased." Eleanor's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to remain calm. She kissed both girls on the forehead. "Go with Miss Pritchard, my dears. Everything will be all right." But as she walked toward the Duke's study, Eleanor was no longer certain that was true. The Duke stood behind his massive desk, his face carved from stone. In his hand was a letter, and Eleanor recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope. "This was delivered today," he said without preamble. "Your mother writes that your youngest sister has been invited to stay with the Viscount Hartley's family for the season. She wishes to thank me for my generosity in making such connections possible." He set the letter down with deliberate care. "I made no such connections. In fact, I specifically instructed that your family was to have no involvement in aristocratic society beyond what they could achieve on their own merits. Did you arrange this invitation?" Eleanor's mind raced. She had written to Lady Hartley, an old friend from before the scandal, asking if she might consider including Margaret in her daughter's season activities. It had been a simple request, one friend to another. She hadn't thought the Duke would object. "I wrote to Lady Hartley," Eleanor admitted. "She and I were close before my family's troubles. I merely asked if she might extend kindness to my sister." "You used your position as my wife to curry favor for your family." "I used a personal friendship to help my sister have the season she deserves. There's nothing mercenary about that." The Duke's eyes were like winter storms. "Everything you do now reflects on this house. Every connection, every favor, every social interaction. You do not have the luxury of personal friendships anymore, Eleanor. You are the Duchess of Ashford. Your actions carry weight and consequence beyond your understanding." "Then help me understand," Eleanor pleaded. "Explain to me why a simple kindness to my sister is treated as a betrayal." "Because I will not have the Ashford name associated with your family's disgrace any more than absolutely necessary. The marriage has satisfied society's demands and resolved your father's debts. That is the extent of my obligation. I will not have you leveraging my position to rehabilitate your relatives' reputations." The cruelty of it struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "They are my family. My sister is 17 years old and deserves a chance at happiness. How can you be so heartless? How can you be so naive?" he shot back. "Do you truly not understand how society functions? Every favor granted is a debt incurred. Every social advancement is built on careful calculation. Your thoughtless sentimentality puts this family at risk." "At risk of what? Basic human decency?" The Duke slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp crack making Eleanor flinch. "At risk of being perceived as weak, of being taken advantage of becoming the subject of gossip and speculation." Catherine understood these things. She knew that a duchess must be above reproach, beyond sentiment. She protected this house through dignity and distance, and died miserable and alone because of it. The words escaped before Eleanor could stop them. The silence that followed was absolute. The Duke went very still, his face draining of color. "What did you say?" His voice was soft, deadly. Eleanor knew she had crossed a line, but she was too angry, too hurt to retreat now. "You heard me. You've built this entire household on the model of your late wife's behavior, but from everything I've heard, Catherine was desperately unhappy here. The servants whisper about it when they think I can't hear. Your daughters remember a mother who grew sadder and more withdrawn every year." Lady Pemberton made cryptic remarks about Catherine learning that defiance has consequences. "What really happened to her, Your Grace? What did this house do to break her?" "Get out!" The Duke's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Get out of my study. Get out of my sight. Not until you tell me the truth. Not until you explain why everyone in this manor acts like Catherine died of something other than natural causes. What are you hiding?" The Duke moved around the desk with frightening speed, grabbing Eleanor's arm. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm, unyielding. For the first time since arriving at Ashford Manor, Eleanor felt genuinely afraid. "You know nothing," he hissed. "Nothing about Catherine, nothing about this house, nothing about the duties you've so carelessly assumed. You want truth? Here is truth. My wife died because she was weak, because she allowed sentiment and emotion to override duty, because she couldn't bear the weight of her responsibilities. And every day I see you making the same mistakes, indulging the same weaknesses, walking the same path that led her to her grave. So yes, I am harsh. Yes, I am cold. Because I will not watch another woman destroy herself through foolish sentiment and naive compassion. He released her arm and stepped back, his breathing ragged. Eleanor stood frozen, her arm tingling where his fingers had gripped it. Catherine didn't die of weakness, Eleanor said quietly. She died of loneliness, of being trapped in a beautiful prison with a husband who mistook coldness for strength. And if you're not careful, you'll do the same to your daughters. Crush all the joy and warmth out of them until they're just empty shells performing their duties without feeling anything at all. Better empty shells than broken disasters, the Duke said flatly. Now get out before I say something we'll both regret. Eleanor fled. She ran through the corridors, past startled servants, up the stairs to her chambers. Only when the door was locked behind her did she allow herself to cry. Great, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She had failed. Failed to reach the Duke. Failed to protect the children. Failed to find any warmth in this frozen wasteland of a marriage. And now she understood something that chilled her more than any winter wind. The Duke wasn't just cold by nature. He was cold by choice. He had deliberately built walls around his heart because he believed emotion was a weakness that had killed his first wife. How could she fight that? How could she change a man who viewed love itself as a fatal disease? The answer came to her slowly as her tears subsided. She couldn't change him. But she didn't have to. She only had to save Emily and Sophia from becoming victims of his twisted philosophy. She had to find a way to give them warmth and love, even in this cold house. And to do that, she needed to learn what had really happened to Catherine. The next morning, Eleanor went looking for answers. She started with the servants, but they closed ranks immediately, their faces shuddering at any mention of the late Duchess. She tried the library, searching for family journals or correspondence, but found nothing useful. She even ventured into the closed-off West Wing, where Catherine's chambers had been sealed after her death, but found the doors locked and the keys nowhere to be found. It was Sophia who finally provided the breakthrough, though unintentionally. Mama used to write in her diary every night, the little girl mentioned one afternoon as Eleanor read to them in the nursery. She said it helped her remember the good things when everything else felt dark. Eleanor's heart quickened. Do you know what happened to her diary? Sophia shook her head. Father locked away all her things, but I saw Miss Pritchard take something from Mama's room the day after she died, a leather book. She was crying. Miss Pritchard, the governess who had served Catherine and now served the Duke, the woman who moved through the manor like a ghost, silent and watchful. That evening, Eleanor waited until the household had settled for the night, then made her way to Miss Pritchard's small room in the servants' quarters. She knocked softly. The governess answered in her nightgown, her eyes widening in shock. Your Grace, is something wrong? May I come in, Miss Pritchard? I need to speak with you privately. The governess stepped aside, clearly terrified. Her room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small wardrobe. But on the nightstand, Eleanor spotted what she'd been searching for, a leather-bound journal. You have Lady Catherine's diary, Eleanor said gently. Please, Miss Pritchard, I need to understand what happened to her. The children need to understand. They blame themselves for their father's coldness, and it's breaking my heart. Please. Miss Pritchard's face crumpled. She sank onto her bed, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't let him destroy it. I couldn't. She trusted me. She told me everything, and I failed her, and the least I could do was keep her words safe. Failed her how? The governess looked up, her eyes haunted. I should have told someone, should have sought help, but I was afraid of his grace, afraid of losing my position, afraid of making things worse. And so I did nothing, and she died, and it's my fault. Eleanor knelt beside the woman, taking her trembling hands. Tell me what happened. Please, Miss Pritchard, let me help finish what Catherine started. And finally, after months of silence, the truth began to emerge. Catherine hadn't died of influenza, as the official story claimed. She had died of a broken heart, yes, but the breaking had been deliberate, systematic. The Duke, consumed by his political ambitions and convinced that emotion was weakness, had slowly isolated his wife. He had forbidden her from seeing friends, from corresponding with family, from doing anything that might make her soft or sentimental. He had criticized her warmth toward the children, her generosity toward the servants, her kindness toward everyone she met. And Catherine, desperate to be a good wife, had tried to become what he wanted. She had grown colder, harder, more perfect, but perfection had come at a terrible price. She had stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped engaging with the world. The diary chronicled her descent into despair, page after page of a woman trying to reconcile the person she was with, the person her husband demanded she become. The final entry, dated 3 days before her death, read simply, "I cannot do this anymore. I have tried so hard to be what he needs, but I am disappearing. The girls don't recognize me anymore. I don't recognize myself. I'm a ghost in my own life. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if I truly became one." She had died in her sleep that night, her heart simply giving up after years of suppressed emotion and denied self. Eleanor read the diary by candlelight, tears streaming down her face. This was the truth the Duke had been hiding. Not murder, but something almost worse. The slow death of a soul crushed under impossible expectations. "What will you do?" Miss Pritchard whispered. "His Grace can never know I kept this. He'll dismiss me, or worse." "He won't know," Eleanor promised. "But I need to borrow this, just for a few days. I swear I'll return it safely." The governess hesitated, then nodded. Her Grace wrote the truth. Someone should know it. Someone should remember her as she really was, not as the perfect Duchess His Grace has made her into in death. Eleanor took the diary back to her chambers and read it cover to cover, absorbing every word. And as she read, a plan began to form, dangerous, possibly disastrous, but the only option she could see. She would confront the Duke with the truth. She would force him to see what his obsession with emotional control had done to Catherine. She would make him understand that he was on the verge of destroying his daughters the same way. And if he cast her out for it, so be it. Some truths were worth any price. The confrontation came 2 nights later. Eleanor waited until the Duke had retired to his study for his evening brandy, then knocked firmly on his door. "Enter." She swept in, the diary clutched in her hands, her heart pounding but her resolve absolute. The Duke looked up from his papers, his expression hardening when he saw her. "I believe I made it clear that you and I are to maintain separate lives within this house. What part of that instruction was unclear?" "The part where I became complicit in the destruction of 2 innocent children," Eleanor said. She placed the diary on his desk. "Read it. Read what you did to your wife. Read how your strength and discipline slowly killed the woman you claimed to love." The Duke's eyes dropped to the leather-bound journal, and all the blood drained from his face. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is the truth written inside. Catherine didn't die of influenza. She died because you demanded she become someone she wasn't. You crushed every warm, loving part of her until there was nothing left but an empty performance of duty. And now you're doing the same thing to Emily and Sophia. You're making them believe that feeling anything is shameful, that loving anything is weakness, and I will not stand by and watch you destroy them the way you destroyed their mother." The Duke stood slowly, his hands shaking as he reached for the diary. He opened it, scanning the first few pages, and Eleanor watched as recognition and then horror crossed his features. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't... I never meant..." "But you did mean it," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "You believed emotion was weakness, so you systematically removed every source of joy from her life. And when she couldn't bear it anymore, when she literally died of despair, you convinced yourself it was her fault for being weak. But it wasn't weakness, Your Grace. It was murder. Slow, unintentional murder." The Duke looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Eleanor saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Anguish, guilt, and something that might have been fear. "I loved her," he said hoarsely. "Everything I did was to protect her, to make her strong enough to survive in this world. You didn't protect her. You imprisoned her. And if you loved her, you have a strange way of showing it." Eleanor drew a shaky breath. "I didn't come here to condemn you, Your Grace. I came to give you a choice. You can continue down this path, raising your daughters the way you tried to reshape Catherine, until they're as broken and hollow as she became. Or you can change. You can learn that love isn't weakness, that warmth isn't failure, that being human isn't something to be ashamed of. And if I can't change..." His voice was barely audible. Then I will take Emily and Sophia away from here. I will petition the courts for guardianship if necessary. I will do whatever it takes to protect them from becoming the next victims of your obsession with perfection." The threat hung in the air between them. The Duke sank back into his chair, still clutching Catherine's diary, looking older and more broken than Eleanor had ever seen him. "You would destroy this family to save it?" he asked. "I would save two little girls from a lifetime of believing they're not worthy of love. Yes, even if it means destroying everything else." The Duke said nothing for a long moment. Then slowly, he began to read the diary in earnest, his face growing more anguished with every page. Eleanor stood watching, her heart hammering, uncertain what would come next, but knowing she had passed the point of no return. She had thrown down the gauntlet. The battle for Ashford Manor, and the souls of everyone within it, was truly joined. And in that moment, standing in the study while her husband confronted the ghosts of his past, Eleanor felt something shift. The fear that had dogged her since arriving at this cold house began to transform into something harder, fiercer. She would not back down. Not now. Not ever. Let the Duke rage. Let the servants gossip. Let society condemn her. She had found her cause, and she would fight for it until her last breath. The Duke read through the night. Eleanor remained in his study, standing by the window as the hours crawled past, watching him turn page after page of his dead wife's final testament. His face had gone from stone to ash, his hands trembling as Catherine's words, her pain, her loneliness, her slow dissolution, confronted him with truths he had spent 3 years avoiding. When dawnlight began to creep through the curtains, he finally closed the diary. His eyes were red-rimmed, though Eleanor couldn't tell if from exhaustion or unshed tears. "I didn't know," he said, his voice scraped raw. "I swear to you, Eleanor, I didn't know she was suffering like this. She never said, she never told me. You never asked." Eleanor's words were quiet but unyielding. "You demanded perfection and called it strength. You mistook silence for acceptance, and when she tried to meet your impossible standards, you praised her for becoming exactly what was killing her." The Duke flinched as though she'd struck him. "What would you have me do now? Catherine is dead. I cannot undo what happened. I cannot bring her back." "No, but you can save your daughters." Eleanor moved closer, her exhaustion making her bold. "Emily and Sophia are walking the same path their mother did. They're learning to bury their feelings, to perform rather than live, to believe that love is something to be ashamed of. You still have time to change that, but only if you choose to." "And if I don't know how?" The question came out broken, and for the first time Eleanor saw not the cold Duke of Ashford, but a man drowning in grief and guilt. "I was raised to believe emotion was weakness. My father beat it out of me. The military reinforced it. Everything in my life has taught me that survival requires hardness. I don't know how to be anything else." Eleanor sat down across from him, bone-tired but unwilling to retreat now. "Then learn. For your daughter's sake, if not your own. Let them laugh, let them cry, let them be children instead of perfect little statues. And if you can't do it alone, then accept help." "From you?" Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite hope, but perhaps the ghost of it. "From anyone willing to show you that strength and warmth aren't opposites, that you can be both hard and human." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Your Grace, I didn't come here expecting love or even friendship, but I did come hoping to build something better than mutual cold tolerance. For the children's sake, we need to find a way forward that doesn't involve crushing their spirits." The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he rose, walked to the window, and stared out at the frost-covered grounds. "Very well, I will attempt to be less harsh with them, but I cannot promise transformation overnight, Eleanor. I am what decades have made me. I'm not asking for overnight transformation, just willingness to try." He nodded slowly, still not looking at her. "You may continue your current arrangements with the children, the dinners, the afternoon visits. I will not interfere as long as they maintain proper decorum in public." It was a small concession, grudging and conditional, but it was more than Eleanor had dared hope for. She stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Don't thank me yet." He finally turned to face her, and his expression was grave. There are forces in this house that will resist any change. The servants who revered Catherine's memory, the family members who benefit from the current order, even the children themselves who have been trained to fear deviation from routine. You've made yourself a target, Eleanor, and I cannot protect you from all the consequences. I didn't ask for protection. I asked for permission to care for your daughters. Then you have it. But tread carefully. Ashford Manor has destroyed stronger women than you. Eleanor left the study as the household began to stir, servants emerging from their quarters to begin the day's work. She caught sight of Mrs. Holloway in the corridor, the housekeeper's eyes narrowing as she took in Eleanor's rumpled dress and exhausted face emerging from the Duke's study at dawn. Let her think what she wants, Eleanor thought grimly. She had bigger battles to fight. But Mrs. Holloway's suspicions proved to be just the beginning. By midday, whispers had spread through the manor like wildfire. The new Duchess had spent the night in his Grace's study. They'd been heard arguing, shouting. The Duke had looked devastated when he'd finally emerged. What had she done to him? What scandal was brewing? Eleanor ignored the pointed stares and hushed conversations, focusing instead on the children. She found Emily and Sophia in the nursery with Miss Pritchard, working on their lessons with unusual intensity. "Good afternoon," Eleanor said warmly. "Might I steal you both for a walk in the gardens? The sun is out for the first time in days." Miss Pritchard looked uncertain. "His Grace's schedule for the young ladies is quite specific, Your Grace. Outdoor time is allocated for 4 o'clock. His Grace has given me permission to adjust their schedule as I see fit," Eleanor interrupted gently. "We'll be back before tea." The governess's eyes widened slightly. Clearly, she'd already heard rumors of the nocturnal confrontation, but she nodded. Emily and Sophia jumped up with barely contained excitement, and Eleanor's heart ached at how starved they were for such simple pleasures. They walked through the frozen gardens, the girls running ahead to examine icicles hanging from the bare tree branches. Eleanor followed at a slower pace, her lack of sleep catching up with her. She was so focused on watching the children that she almost didn't notice Lady Pemberton until the woman's sharp voice cut through the cold air. "How touching! The new Duchess plays at motherhood!" Eleanor turned to find the Duke's aunt approaching, wrapped in an enormous fur coat, her face pinched with disapproval. "Lady Pemberton, I didn't know you were visiting. I maintain rooms here. I come and go as I please." The older woman's eyes raked over Eleanor with unconcealed disdain. "The servants tell me you've been making quite a spectacle of yourself, disrupting routines, coddling the children, spending nights alone with my nephew. One might wonder what sort of woman behaves so indiscreetly." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I spent last night discussing important family matters with my husband. There was nothing indiscreet about it." "Of course not. Just as there was nothing indiscreet about using your position to secure social favors for your impoverished relatives. Just as there's nothing indiscreet about undermining a system that worked perfectly well before you arrived." Lady Pemberton stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you're clever, don't you? That you can waltz into Ashford Manor and remake it in your image? Catherine tried that too. Look where it got her." "Catherine died because no one in this house cared enough to see she was suffering," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with anger. "And if you think I'm going to repeat her mistakes by staying silent while cruelty masquerades as tradition, you're very much mistaken." Lady Pemberton's eyes flashed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, girl. This family has survived for centuries because we understand that some things are more important than individual happiness. Order, duty, reputation. Catherine forgot that. And you," she jabbed a finger toward Eleanor's chest, "you're even more dangerous because you don't just forget it. You actively fight against it." "Good," Eleanor stood her ground. "Maybe this family needs someone willing to fight. Then you'd better prepare for war." Lady Pemberton smiled coldly. "Because I promise you, child, you will lose." The older woman swept away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the garden, her heart pounding. She looked over at Emily and Sophia, who were blissfully unaware of the confrontation, and felt a new wave of determination. Let Lady Pemberton and the rest of them plot and scheme. Eleanor had the Duke's grudging permission and the children's desperate need. That would have to be enough. But that night at dinner, taken alone in the small dining room, as the Duke had retreated to his chambers with a headache, Eleanor received her first real blow. Mrs. Holloway appeared with a letter on a silver tray. This arrived by express courier, Your Grace. From London. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was from her mother, and the words made her blood run cold. My dearest Eleanor, I write with devastating news. Your father has been arrested. The debts we believe settled by your marriage have been called in again by a creditor we didn't know existed, a Mr. Cornelius Black. He claims your father owes him £10,000 from a gambling debt incurred before the Duke's intervention. The authorities have taken your father to debtor's prison until the sum is paid. Margaret and I are beside ourselves. Please, if there is anything you can do, any influence you can bring to bear, we are desperate. Your loving mother. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, each word sinking in like a blade. £10,000. A debt from before her marriage, a creditor who had waited until now to collect. It was too convenient to be coincidence. She went immediately to the Duke's chambers, knocking urgently. He answered in his shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, clearly preparing for bed. Eleanor, what is it? She thrust the letter at him. My father has been arrested. There's a debt, a new debt, that wasn't disclosed before our marriage. Your Grace, I need to ask— No. His face had already closed off, reading her intention before she could voice it. You haven't even heard what I'm asking. You're going to ask me to pay this new debt, and the answer is no. He handed the letter back. I paid what was agreed upon. I am not responsible for debts your father concealed. He didn't conceal it. The letter says this creditor is only now coming forward. Please, Your Grace, my father will rot in debtor's prison. They're terrible places, disease, violence, despair. Then perhaps he should have considered that before gambling away money he didn't have. The Duke's voice was hard. I'm sorry for your family's troubles, Eleanor, but I will not be manipulated into throwing good money after bad. Your father made his choices. He must face the consequences. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. Just hours ago you read Catherine's diary. You saw what your hardness did to her, and now you're going to condemn my father to suffering because of principles? This is different. Catherine was my wife, my responsibility. Your father is not. But I am your wife now, and you're asking me to stand by while my father suffers in prison, knowing I have access to the means to help him, but am forbidden from using it? The Duke's jaw tightened. Yes, that is exactly what I'm asking, because if I bail him out now, there will be another debt next month, and another after that. Men like your father, weak men who cannot control their vices, they are bottomless pits. I will not pour the Ashford fortune into one. Then give me the money from my own dowry, Eleanor pleaded, or let me sell my jewelry, anything, please. Your dowry is now part of the Ashford estate, as is any property you brought to this marriage. You own nothing separately, Eleanor. That is the law, and I will not authorize the funds for this purpose. Eleanor felt something break inside her. You're a monster. No, I'm a duke who understands that charity without boundaries is just another form of weakness. He moved to close the door. I'm sorry, Eleanor, truly, but my answer is final. The door shut in her face. Eleanor stood in the corridor, the letter crumpling in her shaking hands. Her father, in debtor's prison. And she was powerless to help him, trapped in a marriage that had cost her everything, her freedom, her dignity, and now her ability to protect the people she loved. Unless— The thought came slowly, dangerously. But once it took root, Eleanor couldn't dislodge it. She did have something of value, something she could leverage. The Duke had dismissed the concerns about scandal and reputation, but he'd been wrong. The Ashford name still mattered, and Eleanor, as the Duchess of Ashford, had the power to either protect that name or destroy it. It was a desperate gamble, possibly suicidal, but what choice did she have? The next morning, Eleanor dressed in her finest gown and took the carriage into the nearby town. The servants watched her go with suspicious eyes, but she had told no one her destination. In the town's main square, she found what she was looking for: the offices of the county newspaper. The editor, Mr. Thornton, was a portly man with ink-stained fingers and sharp, intelligent eyes. He nearly fell out of his chair when the Duchess of Ashford walked into his cramped office. Your Grace, to what do I owe the honor? Eleanor sat down without being invited, folding her hands in her lap. Mr. Thornton, I have a story for you, one that will sell newspapers from here to London. I'm prepared to give you an exclusive interview about my marriage, my husband, and the true circumstances of the late Duchess Catherine's death. Thornton's eyes went wide. Your Grace, I don't think, that is, His Grace would never. His Grace doesn't need to approve. I'm offering you the story of the decade. The new Duchess of Ashford reveals the dark secrets of Britain's most powerful family. Think of the sales. Think of the attention. She leaned forward. But I have conditions. The editor licked his lips nervously. What conditions? You will pay me £500 for the exclusive rights to my story, and you will run a companion piece about the plight of debtors in England's prisons, specifically mentioning my father's case and the predatory creditor who has imprisoned him. You'll make him a sympathetic figure, a victim of circumstance rather than a moral failure. £500? Thornton looked like he might faint. Your Grace, that's more than my annual budget for. Then find investors. Sell advance subscriptions. I don't care how you do it, but that's my price. Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirts. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. If you agree, I'll return and tell you everything. If you don't, I'll take my story to the London papers instead. Good day, Mr. Thornton. She left him gaping after her, his mind clearly racing with the possibilities. Eleanor climbed back into the carriage, her heart hammering. She had just crossed a line from which there was no return. When the Duke discovered what she'd done, and he would discover it, his fury would be apocalyptic. But her father would be free. Margaret would be safe. And Eleanor would have proven that she was not a woman to be dismissed or controlled. Let the consequences come. She was ready. That evening, a messenger arrived from Mr. Thornton with a single word written on expensive paper. Agreed. Eleanor locked herself in her study and began to write. She wrote about arriving at Ashford Manor as a purchased bride. She wrote about the Duke's coldness, the household's hostility, the oppressive atmosphere of grief that hung over everything. She wrote about Catherine's diary, about the slow destruction of a vibrant woman under impossible expectations. She wrote about Emily and Sophia, two little girls being raised to fear their own emotions. She wrote the truth. All of it, unflinching and raw. When she finished, it was nearly midnight. Her hand cramped from hours of writing, and her eyes burned with exhaustion. But the pages before her contained something powerful, a weapon that could either save her family or destroy her completely. Probably both. She was sealing the pages in an envelope when the Duke burst into her study without knocking, his face dark with rage. What have you done? He was breathing hard as though he'd run from somewhere. In his hand was a crumpled note. I just received word from a contact in town. You visited the newspaper office today. You met with the editor privately. What did you tell him? Eleanor stood, lifting her chin. I told him I would provide an exclusive interview about life at Ashford Manor, about the truth behind Catherine's death, about how the great Duke of Ashford treats his wives like possessions rather than people. The color drained from the Duke's face. You wouldn't dare. I already have. Eleanor gestured to the sealed envelope. My story is written. Tomorrow morning, I'll deliver it to Mr. Thornton, and within a week, every newspaper in England will be running versions of it. The scandal will be enormous. Your reputation will be destroyed, but my father will be freed and my family will be saved. You're insane. The Duke's voice was barely above a whisper. Do you have any idea what you've just done? This won't just destroy me, Eleanor. It will destroy you. You'll be a social pariah. No family will receive you. The Queen herself will cut you. You'll be ruined. Then I'll be ruined. Eleanor's hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. I asked you for help, begged you, and you refused out of pride and principle, so I found another way. This is on you, Your Grace. You made me desperate enough to do this. The Duke stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. I could have the story suppressed. I have influence with every newspaper owner in the county. Then I'll go to London, to Edinburgh, to Dublin if necessary. I'll find someone willing to print it. You can't silence me, Your Grace. Not anymore. I could divorce you, cast you out without a penny. Do it. I'll write a second story about that too. The Duke who divorces his second wife for daring to speak the truth. It will only make the scandal worse. They faced each other across the study, the envelope sitting between them like a lit fuse. The Duke's face was a mask of controlled fury, but beneath it, Eleanor could see something else. Fear. He was finally realizing that she meant every word, that she would burn everything down rather than be powerless again. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "What will it take for you to destroy those pages?" £10,000, delivered to Mr. Cornelius Black within 2 days. My father released from debtor's prison. And your word that you will never again use your financial control to manipulate or punish me or my family. That's extortion. No, it's marriage. Eleanor's smile was bitter. You wanted a business arrangement, Your Grace. Well, this is business. I have something you want, your reputation intact. You have something I want, my father's freedom. We negotiate. We compromise. Isn't that how these things work? The Duke's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might actually strike her. But then he seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. You've become ruthless, he said quietly. You made me ruthless. You and this house, and everyone in it who treats kindness like weakness and compassion like failure. Eleanor picked up the envelope. Do we have an agreement, Your Grace? Or shall I deliver this tomorrow as planned? The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Finally, the Duke nodded once, sharp and angry. £10,000, your father freed. But hear me, Eleanor, this changes everything between us. I thought we might find some way forward after last night. I thought perhaps we could build something less hostile. But you've just declared war, and I will remember this. Good. Eleanor clutched the envelope to her chest. Remember it. Remember that I'm not Catherine. I won't quietly fade away when you try to crush me. I'll fight back, every time. The Duke turned and walked to the door, then paused. You think you've won, but you've just made enemies of everyone in this house who matters. Lady Pemberton, Mrs. Holloway, half the staff, they already resented you. Now they'll actively work to destroy you, and I won't stop them. I didn't expect you to. He left without another word. Eleanor waited until his footsteps faded, then collapsed into her chair, her entire body shaking with reaction. She'd done it. She'd actually threatened the Duke of Ashford, one of the most powerful men in England, and he'd backed down. But the victory tasted like ash, because he was right. She had just declared war on her own household, and she was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and completely alone. The next 2 days passed in a haze of tension. The Duke kept his word. Eleanor received word that her father had been released and the debt paid in full, but the atmosphere at Ashford Manor became toxic. Servants who had been merely cold now openly glared at her. Meals appeared late or poorly prepared. Her requests were ignored or deliberately misunderstood. Lady Pemberton, upon learning what had transpired, confronted Eleanor in the corridor with eyes blazing with malice. You've made a terrible mistake, girl. My nephew may have capitulated to your blackmail, but the family will not forget this. You've attacked the Ashford name. That is unforgivable. The Ashford name will survive, Eleanor said tiredly. Names always do. Perhaps. But will you? Lady Pemberton smiled coldly. Accidents happen in great houses. Stairs become slippery. Carriages have faulty wheels. Young duchesses fall ill with mysterious ailments. Catherine learned that lesson too late. I suggest you remember it. The threat was unmistakable. Eleanor felt ice slide down her spine, but she forced herself not to show fear. Are you threatening me, Lady Pemberton? I'm educating you. There's a difference. The old woman swept past, leaving Eleanor shaking in the corridor. That night, Eleanor lay in bed, unable to sleep, staring at the canopy above her, and wondering if she'd been incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Probably both. She thought about Catherine, slowly dying in this very manner while everyone watched and did nothing. Had Catherine received threats too? Had she been warned that defiance would have consequences? A soft knock at her door made Eleanor sit bolt upright, her heart racing. Who is it? Miss Pritchard, Your Grace. May I enter? It's urgent. Eleanor wrapped a robe around herself and opened the door. The governess slipped inside, her face pale and frightened. What's wrong? I overheard Mrs. Holloway talking to Lady Pemberton tonight. Your Grace, They're planning something. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught phrases. Teach her a lesson. Make her understand her place before she does more damage. Your Grace, I think you may be in real danger. Eleanor's mouth went dry. What kind of danger? I don't know, but after what happened to Lady Catherine, Miss Pritchard's voice dropped to a whisper. Your Grace, Lady Catherine's death wasn't natural. I've never told anyone this, but the doctor who attended her, he was drunk when he signed the death certificate. And the symptoms she showed in her final days, they weren't influenza. I've seen influenza. This was different. Her pupils were dilated, she had seizures, she couldn't keep any food down. It looked more like poison, Eleanor finished, her blood turning to ice. Miss Pritchard nodded miserably. I could never prove it. And who would I tell? The Duke wouldn't have believed me. The household staff all said I was imagining things, making drama out of grief. So I stayed silent. But, Your Grace, if they did it once, they could do it again. Eleanor's mind raced. Who would have had access to Catherine's food? Mrs. Holloway oversees the kitchen. Lady Pemberton visited frequently in those final months. And His Grace's valet, Mr. Jessup, was often sent to deliver meals to her chambers when she grew too weak to come downstairs. Miss Pritchard wrung her hands. Your Grace, what will you do? I don't know yet, but thank you for warning me. Eleanor gripped the governess's hands. Be careful, Miss Pritchard. If they suspect you've told me anything, you could be in danger too. After the governess left, Eleanor paced her chamber, her mind whirling. If Catherine had been poisoned, if this household had actually murdered the previous Duchess, then Eleanor's threat to expose them had just painted an enormous target on her back. She couldn't go to the Duke. He'd either think her paranoid, or worse, might already know about Catherine's real cause of death, and have chosen to cover it up. She couldn't trust the servants. She couldn't even be certain which food was safe to eat. She was trapped in a house full of people who wanted her gone, with no allies except two little girls and a terrified governess. The next morning, Eleanor forced herself to maintain her normal routine despite the fear gnawing at her gut. She breakfasted with Emily and Sophia in the nursery, carefully watching Miss Pritchard prepare the food herself. She walked the gardens, constantly aware of windows overlooking her path. She took tea alone in the small drawing room, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted the cup. Was it poisoned? Would it be today? Tomorrow? The paranoia was exhausting. That afternoon, a letter arrived for the Duke. Eleanor watched from the stairs as Mr. Graves delivered it on a silver tray, his expression more sour than usual. The Duke opened it, read the contents, and his face went absolutely white. Who delivered this? He demanded. A courier from London, Your Grace. He awaits your reply. The Duke crumpled the letter and strode toward his study, then spotted Eleanor on the stairs. You, come with me, now. Eleanor followed, her heart sinking. What now? In the study, the Duke thrust the crumpled letter at her. Read it. It was from the Duke's political allies in Parliament. They had heard rumors of a scandal brewing at Ashford Manor. Questions were being asked about the late Duchess Catherine's death. A journalist had been making inquiries. If these rumors proved true, the Duke's political career was finished. His allies were distancing themselves immediately. The letter ended with a cold suggestion. Control your household, or we will be forced to control it for you. This is your doing, the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet. You threatened to expose the family, and now the wolves are circling. They smell blood. I haven't delivered my story to anyone. I kept my word. Eleanor's hands shook as she held the letter. Someone else must be spreading rumors. Lady Pemberton, the Duke said bitterly. She's decided that if you won't be controlled through fear, she'll destroy us all to teach you a lesson. The old harridan would rather see the family name ruined than allow you to wield any power. For the first time since their confrontation, Eleanor saw not anger in the Duke's eyes, but something approaching desperation. Your Grace, there's something you need to know. About Catherine, about how she really died. She told him everything Miss Pritchard had shared. The suspicious symptoms, the drunk doctor, the access Mrs. Holloway and Lady Pemberton had to Catherine's meals. With every word, the Duke's face grew harder, colder, until he looked like a man carved from ice and rage. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. I found this among Catherine's things after she died, he said quietly, hidden in a book in her chambers. I didn't know what it was, so I sent it to a chemist in London for analysis. He identified it as arsenic, a significant amount. He set the vial down with a soft click. I told myself Catherine had been using it as a cosmetic treatment. Women do that sometimes, in small doses, to improve their complexions. I convinced myself it was innocent because the alternative was too horrific to contemplate. That someone in your household murdered her, Eleanor finished. Yes, the Duke's voice broke. I was a coward. I buried the evidence, accepted the influenza diagnosis, and tried to forget. Because acknowledging murder meant acknowledging that I had failed to protect my wife, that I had been so blind, so focused on my political ambitions and my ridiculous ideas about strength that I hadn't noticed someone was slowly killing her. He sank into his chair, looking older than Eleanor had ever seen him. And now they're coming for you, because you're everything they feared Catherine might become. Defiant, bold, unwilling to accept the status quo. You're the living proof that the Ashford system is broken. Eleanor sat down across from him, her mind reeling. What do we do? We? The Duke looked up at her with something that might have been surprise. After everything I've done to you, you still say we? Emily and Sophia need both of us alive and fighting, so yes, we. Eleanor leaned forward. Your Grace, I know we've been enemies since the day I arrived, but if there are actually murderers in this house, we need to work together, for the children's sake, if nothing else. The Duke studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Alliance, then. Temporary and tactical. We protect the children, we identify who killed Catherine, and we survive long enough to see justice done. Agreed. Eleanor extended her hand across the desk. The Duke looked at it, then reached out and shook it, his grip firm and warm for the first time since they'd met. Welcome to the real battle for Ashford Manor, Eleanor. I hope you're as brave as you pretend to be. I hope so too, Eleanor admitted, because outside the study door she could hear footsteps, servants moving through the corridors, Lady Pemberton's sharp voice giving orders, Mrs. Holloway's responses, the household continuing its routines as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Eleanor and the Duke now knew the truth. Ashford Manor housed a killer, someone who had murdered Catherine and would likely kill again to protect their secrets, and Eleanor had just made herself the next target. The alliance between Eleanor and the Duke began with a single practical decision. She would move her chambers to the suite adjacent to his, not as a romantic gesture, but as a strategic necessity. If someone in the household planned to poison her as they had Catherine, proximity to the Duke offered at least the illusion of protection. They won't dare attempt anything if they know I'm watching, the Duke said, as he personally supervised the moving of Eleanor's belongings. The servants who carried her trunks wore expressions of shock. The master bedchamber wing had been sealed since Catherine's death, a shrine to grief. Now the new Duchess was violating that sacred space. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, her face rigid with disapproval. Your Grace, these chambers have not been properly aired or prepared. Surely Her Grace would be more comfortable remaining in the East Wing. Her Grace will be comfortable where I say she'll be comfortable, the Duke interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Have fires lit in both rooms immediately. And Mrs. Holloway, from this moment forward, all meals served to the Duchess will be prepared under Miss Pritchard's direct supervision and delivered by Mr. Graves personally. No one else is to have access to her food. The housekeeper's eyes widened with barely concealed fury. Your Grace, that is highly irregular. The kitchen staff will be insulted by such implications. Then they may be insulted. Those are my orders. The Duke's gaze was steel. Unless you have some objection to ensuring my wife's safety. Mrs. Holloway's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed a stiff curtsy. No objection, Your Grace. It shall be as you command. But as she retreated, Eleanor caught the venomous glare the woman directed at her. Whatever fragile peace had existed was now completely shattered. The household knew something had shifted, even if they didn't understand exactly what. That evening, Eleanor and the Duke dined together for the first time since their wedding, not at opposite ends of that ridiculous table, but in his private study, with food that Miss Pritchard had prepared herself and Mr. Graves had transported directly from the kitchen under lock and key. "This is absurd," Eleanor said, watching the elaborate precautions. "We're treating our own household like enemy territory." "Because it is enemy territory." The Duke poured wine from a bottle he'd personally opened. "Trust no one, Eleanor. Not the servants, not the family members who come and go, not even the children's governess beyond what we absolutely must." "You think Miss Pritchard could be involved?" "I think everyone is potentially involved until proven otherwise. Catherine trusted too easily. It got her killed." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I won't make that mistake again." They ate in tense silence, each lost in dark thoughts. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "We need a plan. We can't just hide in your chambers and hope the killer reveals themselves." "I've been thinking about that." The Duke set down his fork. "The vial of arsenic I found. It was hidden in one of Catherine's books. A volume of poetry, to be specific. The book had been a gift." "From whom?" "Lady Pemberton." The Duke's expression was grim. "I'd forgotten that detail until today. She gave it to Catherine the Christmas before she died, claimed it was from their family library." Catherine was delighted. She loved poetry. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. So Lady Pemberton had access to something Catherine treasured, something she'd keep close, something she might not question if it contained a hidden vial. Exactly, and Lady Pemberton visited Catherine frequently during those final months, always bringing small gifts, always so solicitous of her health. The Duke's hands clenched into fists. "I thought she was being kind, supportive. I was a fool. But why would your aunt want Catherine dead? What did she gain?" "Control." The Duke rose and began pacing. "My aunt has lived at Ashford Manor since my father died. She's held power over the household staff, influenced family decisions, maintained the traditions she values. Catherine began pushing back against that in her final year. She wanted to modernize the household, give more freedom to the servants, make changes that threatened the old order, and Lady Pemberton couldn't tolerate it." Eleanor remembered the old woman's threats in the corridor. "She said the same things to me, that I was attacking the Ashford name by defying tradition, that accidents happen to duchesses who forget their place. Then we have our primary suspect." The Duke stopped pacing, his face hard. "But suspicion isn't proof. We need evidence, something concrete enough to bring before a magistrate." "What about the arsenic vial you found? Can't we use that?" "It proves Catherine had arsenic in her possession, not that someone else administered it. A defense attorney would argue she was using it cosmetically, or even that she took her own life." The Duke's voice was bitter. "No, we need more. We need to catch Lady Pemberton in the act of attempting harm, or we need testimony from someone who witnessed her poisoning Catherine." Eleanor thought of the silent, fearful servants. No one will testify against her. They're all too frightened. Then we need to give them something to be more frightened of. The Duke's eyes glinted with dangerous purpose. "And I have an idea how to do that. But, Eleanor, it will require you to put yourself at considerable risk." "Tell me." Over the next hour, they crafted a plan that was equal parts brilliant and terrifying. Eleanor would appear to fall ill, the same mysterious symptoms that had plagued Catherine. They would make it obvious that she'd been poisoned, and in the chaos that followed, they would watch to see who seemed most satisfied by her condition. More importantly, they would plant false information suggesting Eleanor had written everything down in a diary, just as Catherine had, and hidden it somewhere in the manor. "If Lady Pemberton believes there's evidence that could expose her, she'll try to find and destroy it," the Duke explained. "And when she does, we'll catch her in the act. And if she tries to finish poisoning me instead, I won't let her get close enough." The Duke's voice was fierce. "You'll be under constant guard, mine or Mr. Graves. And the illness will be pure theater. We'll use theatrical makeup and acting to simulate the symptoms. You won't actually be in danger." Eleanor wasn't entirely convinced, but she also couldn't see another option. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. I'll summon the family doctor, a new one, not the drunk who signed Catherine's death certificate. We'll tell him you've fallen mysteriously ill, and we'll make sure the entire household knows about it." That night, Eleanor lay in her new chambers, Catherine's former rooms, which still carried the faint scent of lavender and loss, and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. The Duke had given her a book on theatrical techniques, which included instructions for creating the appearance of fever, weakness, and other symptoms. She practiced in front of the mirror, making her face look drawn and pale, her eyes glassy and unfocused. The next morning, she emerged from her chambers looking genuinely terrible. She'd barely slept, which helped the illusion. Miss Pritchard nearly dropped the breakfast tray when she saw her. "Your Grace, you look dreadful." "I feel dreadful," Eleanor said, allowing a tremor into her voice. "I've been ill all night. Vomiting, chills, terrible pains in my stomach." The governess's face went white. "Oh no, not again. Your Grace, you must see a doctor immediately. The Duke is sending for one." Eleanor touched her forehead dramatically. "Miss Pritchard, if anything happens to me, you must know I've been keeping a diary. Everything that's happened since I arrived at Ashford Manor. Everything about Catherine's death, about the threats I've received. It's all written down, hidden where only someone very clever could find it." "Your Grace, please don't speak like that. You'll be fine. You must be fine." But Eleanor could see the information registering in Miss Pritchard's mind. By noon, the entire household would know about the supposed diary. The doctor arrived that afternoon, a competent-looking man named Dr. Morrison, who examined Eleanor with grave concern. The Duke had briefed him beforehand about the ruse, but to everyone else, his diagnosis sounded terrifyingly real. "Her Grace is exhibiting symptoms consistent with arsenical poisoning," Dr. Morrison announced to the assembled household staff. "The same symptoms, I'm told, that afflicted the late Duchess Catherine. I've administered a purgative and recommended complete bed rest. If her condition worsens, the prognosis is quite poor." The reactions were telling. Mrs. Holloway looked stunned. Several of the younger maids began crying. Mr. Graves stood rigid with shock, but Lady Pemberton, who had appeared during the examination, looked almost pleased. A small, satisfied smile flickered across her face before she schooled her expression into appropriate concern. "How terrible," Lady Pemberton said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "First Catherine, now Eleanor. One might think Ashford Manor is cursed." "One might think someone in this manor is a poisoner," the Duke said coldly, his eyes locked on his aunt. "And I intend to find out who." Lady Pemberton's smile vanished. "Surely you don't suspect—" "How dare you imply—" "I imply nothing. I state facts. 2 duchesses, the same symptoms, the same mysterious illness. Either this house is cursed, as you suggest, or someone within it is committing murder." The Duke's voice carried through the room like a whip. "I've sent word to London. Investigators will arrive within the week. Every member of this household will be questioned. Every room will be searched, and whoever is responsible will hang." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor, watching from her sickbed, saw Lady Pemberton's face cycle through several emotions: shock, fear, and finally cold calculation. "Of course, nephew," the old woman said smoothly. "We must all cooperate fully, though I wonder if poor Eleanor's condition might have simpler explanations. The stress of her new position, perhaps, or guilt over her recent attempts to blackmail you into supporting her wastrel father." "Careful, Aunt," the Duke said softly. "Your concern for my wife's reputation is noted, as is your eagerness to blame anyone but yourself." Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed dangerously, but she said nothing more. She swept from the room, her posture rigid with barely suppressed rage. That night, the trap was set. Eleanor lay in her chambers, pretending to sleep, while the Duke kept watch from the adjoining room with the connecting door slightly ajar. Hours passed in tense silence. Eleanor's back ached from lying still, and several times she nearly dozed off for real. Then, around 3 in the morning, she heard it, the soft creak of her chamber door opening. Eleanor forced her breathing to remain slow and steady, her eyes closed to slits so she could see without appearing awake. A figure moved through the darkness, carrying a single candle. As it drew closer, Eleanor recognized Lady Pemberton's distinctive silhouette. The old woman moved with surprising stealth for someone her age, crossing to Eleanor's small writing desk and beginning to search through the drawers. Papers rustled softly. Books were opened and shaken. Lady Pemberton muttered under her breath, frustrated by her lack of success. Then she turned toward the bed. and Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. Lady Pemberton was holding something, a small vial, identical to the one the Duke had found among Catherine's things. The old woman uncorked the vial and moved closer to Eleanor's bedside, where a water glass sat on the nightstand. Eleanor's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. Lady Pemberton wasn't just searching for a diary. She was actually trying to poison her. Just as Lady Pemberton's hand extended toward the water glass, the Duke burst through the connecting door, a lamp blazing in his hand. "Stop!" His voice thundered through the chamber. Lady Pemberton froze, the vial still clutched in her hand. For a moment, no one moved. Then the old woman's face twisted into something ugly and hateful. "You always were too soft," she spat at her nephew. "Just like your father, weak men who let women ruin everything our family built. You murdered Catherine." The Duke's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "My wife, the mother of my children, your own niece by marriage. She was destroying this family." Lady Pemberton's composure had completely shattered. Making changes, talking about reform, encouraging weakness and sentiment. She would have dismantled everything, the traditions, the order, the very foundations of what makes the Ashford name great. I tried to guide her, to correct her, but she wouldn't listen. She was going to tell you everything, expose all the ways I'd been protecting this family's interests. She left me no choice. Eleanor sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "What interests? What were you protecting?" Lady Pemberton's laugh was bitter. "Do you think running a ducal household is simple? Someone has to make the hard decisions. Someone has to skim a little from the accounts to maintain proper relationships with suppliers, to pay off troublesome servants, to ensure everything runs smoothly." Catherine discovered the discrepancies. She threatened to expose me unless I stopped, as if I could simply stop managing this manor the way it needs to be managed. "You were embezzling," the Duke said flatly, "and when Catherine discovered it, you killed her to protect yourself." "I protected this family. Everything I did was for the Ashford name." Lady Pemberton's voice rose to a shriek. "And now this little nobody comes in with her blackmail schemes and her bleeding heart, trying to drag us all down to her level. Well, I won't allow it. I won't." She lunged toward Eleanor, the vial raised. But the Duke was faster. He caught his aunt's wrist in an iron grip, forcing her hand open. The vial fell to the floor and shattered, its contents seeping into the carpet. Mr. Graves appeared in the doorway, summoned by the commotion. "Your Grace?" "Send for the magistrate," the Duke commanded, still restraining his struggling aunt. "Lady Pemberton is to be arrested for the murder of Catherine, Duchess of Ashford, and the attempted murder of Eleanor, current Duchess of Ashford." "You can't do this!" Lady Pemberton screamed. "I'm family! You can't!" "You stopped being family the moment you poisoned my wife." The Duke's voice was cold as death. "Guards, take her to the cellar and lock her in until the authorities arrive. And someone clean up this poison before it harms anyone else." As Lady Pemberton was dragged away, still screaming threats and protestations, Eleanor finally allowed herself to shake. The Duke sat beside her on the bed, his own hands trembling. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." Terrified, but not hurt. Eleanor looked at the shattered vial on the floor. "She really was going to kill me. Even knowing you were investigating, even knowing you suspected her, she couldn't stop herself. The embezzlement must have been significant, enough to hang for, if exposed." The Duke ran a hand through his hair. "She chose to kill rather than face justice for theft. And Catherine died because she wanted to do the right thing." "We need to tell the girls," Eleanor said quietly. "They deserve to know the truth about their mother, that she wasn't weak, that she was brave enough to stand up to evil, even when it cost her everything." The Duke nodded slowly. "In the morning. For now, let's just breathe. It's over." But it wasn't quite over. Over the next few days, as the magistrate investigated and Lady Pemberton was formally charged with murder, the full extent of her crimes came to light. She had been embezzling from the Ashford estate for nearly 15 years, skimming thousands of pounds from household accounts. The money had gone to support her own extravagant lifestyle and to pay bribes to various people who might otherwise have exposed her. Catherine had discovered the theft purely by accident, while reviewing household accounts during one of her modernization efforts. She had confronted Lady Pemberton privately, hoping to resolve the matter quietly. Instead, the old woman had begun slowly poisoning her, using arsenic disguised as a tonic for Catherine's nerves. The household reeled from the revelations. Mrs. Holloway, it turned out, had suspected something but had been too frightened of Lady Pemberton to speak up. Several other servants had noticed irregularities but had dismissed them or been threatened into silence. The entire manor had been living under the thumb of a murderess, too cowed or complicit to stop her. When Eleanor and the Duke finally sat down with Emily and Sophia to explain what had happened, the girls' reactions were heartbreaking and cathartic in equal measure. Mama tried to stop something bad, Emily said slowly, processing the information. And the bad person hurt her for it. Yes, Eleanor confirmed gently. Your mama was very brave. She saw something wrong and tried to make it right. That's what good people do, even when it's frightening. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. But she died. Being good got her killed. The Duke, who had been silent throughout most of the conversation, finally spoke. Your mother died because evil exists in this world. But that doesn't mean being good is wrong. It means we have to be smart about fighting evil. We have to be brave like your mother, but also careful, and we have to stand together. He looked at Eleanor as he said it, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not love exactly, but respect, recognition, partnership. The trial of Lady Pemberton became the scandal of the season, exactly as Eleanor had once threatened to create. But this time, the scandal served justice rather than revenge. The old woman was convicted of murder and embezzlement and sentenced to death. The execution was set for the following month. Ashford Manor slowly began to change in the wake of her removal. Mrs. Holloway, stripped of her protector, became suddenly cooperative. The household staff, freed from Lady Pemberton's tyranny, began to relax. Slowly, tentatively, warmth began to creep back into the cold corridors. Eleanor found herself in an odd position. She had been vindicated. Her instincts about the household's toxicity had been correct. Her defiance had led to the exposure of a killer. The servants who had once despised her now treated her with wary respect. The family members who had scorned her now fell silent when she entered a room. But the Duke's political allies, learning the full story, began to reverse their earlier abandonment. Letters arrived praising the Duke's courage in exposing corruption within his own family. Invitations poured in from society matrons who wanted to meet the brave new Duchess who had solved a murder. You're becoming quite the sensation, the Duke remarked one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of correspondence. London society is calling you the fearless Duchess. Eleanor laughed without humor. I wasn't fearless. I was terrified every moment. That's what made it brave. The Duke set down his letters and looked at her seriously. Eleanor, I owe you an apology, a profound one. I brought you to this house as a piece of property, treated you with contempt, and very nearly got you killed through my blindness and arrogance. You had every right to hate me. Instead, you fought to save my daughters and expose the truth about Catherine's death. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. The Duke looked different now. Older, yes, but also more human. The ice had begun to crack, revealing the man beneath. I don't hate you, she said finally. I did, for a while, but I think I understand you better now. You were taught that emotion was weakness, and life seemed to confirm that lesson when Catherine died. You built walls to protect yourself and your daughters. It was wrong, but it came from pain, not malice. That doesn't excuse it. No, but it explains it. An explanation is the first step toward change. Eleanor leaned forward. Your Grace, William, he interrupted. My name is William. I think after everything we've been through, you can call me by my name. William, Eleanor repeated, testing the intimacy of it. I didn't come to Ashford Manor expecting love or even happiness, but I'd like to think we could build something resembling partnership, not for romantic reasons, but because Emily and Sophia deserve parents who can work together. Can we do that? The Duke, William, nodded slowly. I'd like to try. I don't know how to be the kind of husband you deserve, Eleanor. I'm still learning how to be the father my daughters need, but I'm willing to try, if you'll be patient with me. Then we have an accord. Eleanor extended her hand across the desk, echoing their earlier alliance. Partners in truth this time. William took her hand, but instead of shaking it, He raised it to his lips and pressed a brief, formal kiss to her knuckles. Partners, he agreed. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But as Eleanor walked back to her chambers that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Ashford Manor: hope. The household was healing. The truth had been exposed. The children were safe. And she and William were learning, slowly and painfully, how to be more than strangers bound by contract. Spring was coming to Ashford Manor, and with it, the possibility of new growth. The next morning, Eleanor found Emily and Sophia waiting for her in the breakfast room. Not in the formal dining room where they'd once been confined, but in the small, sunny morning room that overlooked the gardens. They had prepared the table themselves, with flowers they'd picked from the greenhouse and a slightly lopsided drawing they'd made together. "We wanted to thank you," Emily said, her serious face lit with something that might have been the beginning of joy. "For finding out what happened to Mama, for making Father see us again, for not giving up on us even when everyone was cruel to you." Sophia threw her arms around Eleanor's waist. "Can we call you Mama Eleanor? Father said we should ask you first." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. She knelt down to look both girls in the eyes. "I would be honored. I know I can never replace your mother, but I promise to love you as fiercely as she did, and to fight for you the way she would have wanted." "We know," Emily said simply. "That's why you're perfect for us." As Eleanor gathered both girls into her arms, she heard footsteps in the doorway. William stood there, watching the scene with an expression that was almost peaceful. "I thought we might all take breakfast together," he said, "as a family, if that would be agreeable." It was a small gesture. A simple meal shared in a sunny room. But for the first time since her wedding day, Eleanor felt like she belonged at Ashford Manor, not as a purchased bride or a reluctant duchess, but as a woman who had fought for her place and won it through courage and truth. The battle for Ashford Manor was not entirely over. There would be more challenges, more adjustments, more moments of struggle. But the tide had turned. The truth had emerged from darkness, and the woman they had scorned and dismissed had proven herself not just their equal, but their better. Eleanor had survived the cold marriage, the hostile household, and the murderous conspiracy. She had done more than survive. She had triumphed. And in doing so, she had begun to transform not just herself, but everyone around her. The fearless Duchess had earned her title, and she was only just beginning. The transformation of Ashford Manor did not happen overnight, but it began that spring morning in the sunny breakfast room, with a family learning how to be whole again. William proved to be a man of his word. In the weeks following Lady Pemberton's arrest, he began the painful work of dismantling the oppressive systems that had governed the household for decades. He replaced Mrs. Holloway with a younger, more progressive housekeeper who actually smiled. He dismissed the servants who had been complicit in his aunt's schemes and hired new staff who understood that Ashford Manor was entering a new era. But the changes went deeper than personnel. William began spending time with Emily and Sophia, real time, not the rigid scheduled visits that had characterized his fatherhood before. Eleanor would find him in the nursery reading stories or walking the gardens with both girls hanging on his arms, or sitting by the fire teaching them chess. "You're getting better at this," Eleanor told him one evening as they watched the girls play in the drawing room, their laughter echoing through corridors that had been silent for too long. William's expression was soft, almost vulnerable. "I'm trying. Some days I still hear my father's voice in my head telling me that affection makes children weak. But then I look at them, and I realize that Catherine was right all along. Love doesn't make people weak. It makes them brave enough to face the world." "She would be proud of you," Eleanor said quietly, "of the father you're becoming." "And you?" William turned to face her. "Are you proud? Or do you still regret the bargain that brought you here?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. "I regret how we started. The coldness, the cruelty, the mutual contempt. But I don't regret where we've arrived. We've built something real from the wreckage, William. That's worth more than a romantic beginning." He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "I want to give you more than just partnership, Eleanor. I want to give you a real marriage. Not immediately. I understand that trust takes time to rebuild. But someday, if you'll have me, I'd like to try to love you the way you deserve." Eleanor's heart stuttered. She had not expected a declaration. however tentative. William, don't answer now, he interrupted gently. Just know that the option exists, and that I'm willing to work for it, however long it takes. Before Eleanor could respond, Sophia came running over, grabbing her hand. Mama Eleanor, come play! Father promised to be the dragon, and we need you to be the princess. Eleanor allowed herself to be dragged into the game, but William's words stayed with her. The possibility of love, offered freely rather than demanded or assumed. It was a gift she hadn't expected, and one she wasn't entirely sure what to do with. The scandal of Lady Pemberton's trial continued to reverberate through society. Initially, Eleanor had feared it would destroy the Ashford reputation. Instead, something unexpected happened. The family's willingness to expose corruption within their own ranks, to choose justice over protection of their name, earned them a different kind of respect. The invitations that poured in were no longer perfunctory social obligations, but genuine expressions of curiosity and admiration. London's most influential hostesses wanted to meet the Duchess, who had solved a murder. Reform-minded politicians sought William's support for new legislation addressing household corruption and the rights of women in marriage. You've made us famous, William observed wryly as he sorted through yet another stack of correspondence. Or perhaps infamous. I'm not entirely sure which. Does it bother you? Eleanor asked. The attention? It would have once. I spent years trying to maintain a facade of perfect control. Now everyone knows our family is as messy and broken as anyone else's. He smiled, and it transformed his face. But oddly, it's liberating. We don't have to pretend anymore. We can just be human. The greatest challenge came from an unexpected quarter. Mr. Cornelius Black, the mysterious creditor who had imprisoned Eleanor's father, requested a meeting at Ashford Manor. Absolutely not, William said immediately when the letter arrived. That man is clearly a fraud and an opportunist. I won't have him in my house. But Eleanor had been thinking about Mr. Black ever since her father's release. Something about the timing of his appearance, the amount he'd claimed, the way he'd vanished after being paid, it all felt orchestrated. What if he wasn't acting alone? She suggested. What if Lady Pemberton arranged the whole thing to distract us, to put pressure on me, to create conflict between us? William's eyes narrowed. That would be consistent with her methods. She did love creating chaos. He considered for a moment. Very well. We'll meet with him. But I'm having the magistrate present, and if he tries anything untoward, he'll find himself in the cell next to my aunt's. Mr. Cornelius Black arrived 3 days later, a heavy-set man with nervous hands and a conscience that appeared to be eating him alive. He refused tea, refused to sit, and stood in the drawing room wringing his hat like a man facing judgment. Your Graces, he began, his voice shaking, I've come to confess. The debt I claimed against Lord Hawke, it was fabricated. Lady Pemberton paid me £500 to create false documents and have his lordship arrested. She wanted to cause trouble for your Grace, to make the Duke angry with you. I didn't know she was a murderess. I swear I didn't, but I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I can't live with it anymore. The magistrate, who had been standing quietly by the window, stepped forward. You understand this confession could lead to charges of fraud? Yes, sir, I understand, but I have to make this right. Black turned to Eleanor, tears streaming down his face. Your Grace, I'm so sorry. Your father suffered because of my greed. I'll return the £10,000 the Duke paid. Every penny. It's blood money, and I don't want it. Eleanor felt a strange mix of anger and pity. This man had been another of Lady Pemberton's tools, like the servants she'd threatened and the systems she'd corrupted. Keep 2,000, she said finally. Use it to start over somewhere far from here. But the rest goes to my father as compensation for his suffering. Eleanor, William began. He was a pawn, Eleanor interrupted. Lady Pemberton was the chess player. Let's not punish the pawn more than necessary. The magistrate recorded Black's confession and escorted him out. William watched them go, then turned to Eleanor with something like awe. You just showed mercy to a man who helped destroy your family. My family is already being restored. My father is free. My mother and sister are safe. Vengeance won't improve any of that. Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm tired of cycles of harm, William. Someone has to break them. Might as well be us. William crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. You're extraordinary. Do you know that? Truly extraordinary. I'm just trying to be better than the worst things that have happened to me. You're succeeding. He took her hands in his. Eleanor, I know I asked you to wait before answering my question about our future, but I need you to know I'm falling in love with you. With your courage, your compassion, your refusal to let cruelty make you cruel in return. I don't expect you to love me back, not after everything I've put you through, but I wanted you to know the truth. Eleanor's breath caught. She looked at this man who had been a cold stranger, then an enemy, then an ally, and now something more. Something that felt dangerously close to what he was describing. I don't know if I love you yet, she said honestly. But I think I could. I think I'm already starting to. And that terrifies me, because I've seen what love can cost in this house. Then we'll be terrified together, William said, his voice rough with emotion. And we'll build something strong enough to withstand the fear. We've already survived murder and scandal. Surely we can survive the risk of caring for each other. Eleanor laughed despite herself, a sound that was half sob. When you put it that way, it almost sounds reasonable. Say yes, Eleanor. Say we can try. Say this cold marriage can become something warm. She looked into his gray eyes, no longer stormy, but clear and honest, and made her choice. Yes, we can try. William pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that was entirely new. No calculation, no duty, just genuine affection. Eleanor allowed herself to lean into the embrace, to feel safe in a way she hadn't since arriving at Ashford Manor. The sound of running feet made them break apart. Emily and Sophia burst into the room, followed by a harried Miss Pritchard. I'm so sorry, Your Graces. They insisted. It's perfectly fine, William assured her. He turned to his daughters with a smile. What's this emergency that requires such dramatic entrance? We wanted to ask, Emily said seriously, if we're allowed to be happy now, really happy, without worrying that something bad will happen. The question broke Eleanor's heart and mended it simultaneously. These children had lived so long in fear, believing that joy was temporary and dangerous. They needed permission to feel safe. William knelt down, gathering both girls into his arms. You're allowed to be as happy as you want, forever. I promise that I will never again make you hide your feelings or pretend to be perfect. You can laugh, cry, be angry, be silly. Whatever you feel is acceptable. Understood? Even if we're loud, Sophia asked tentatively. Especially if you're loud. This house has been quiet for too long. It's time for noise and chaos and life. The girls looked at each other, then at Eleanor as if seeking final confirmation. She nodded, smiling through sudden tears. And then, as if a dam had broken, both children began to laugh. Real, unrestrained, joyful laughter that filled the drawing room and spilled out into the corridors beyond. William stood, pulling Eleanor close to his side as they watched the girls dance around the room with Miss Pritchard, who had also started laughing. This is what I wanted to give Catherine, he said quietly. This freedom, this joy. I was too blind to see it then, but I see it now. Catherine gave you something too, Eleanor replied. She gave you these beautiful girls, and her diary gave us the truth that set us all free. She's part of this healing, William. Her memory is part of what makes this possible. He nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I'd like to commission a portrait of her, not the formal one that hangs in the gallery, but something warmer. I want the girls to remember her as she really was, laughing, alive, full of love. Will you help me with that? Of course. Over the following months, Ashford Manor truly transformed. The portrait of Catherine was completed and hung in the library, showing her reading by the window with a gentle smile. Emily and Sophia visited it often, telling their mother stories about their days, about Eleanor and William, about the new life blooming in the manor. Eleanor's family was gradually rehabilitated in society. Her sister Margaret made a successful match with a kind young barrister. Her father, chastened by his experiences and determined to change, took a modest position managing an estate in the country. Her mother wrote weekly letters full of gratitude and love. The household staff, freed from Lady Pemberton's oppression, became loyal and genuine in their service. New traditions replaced old ones. Christmas became a celebration of warmth rather than rigid formality, with the girls helping to decorate and the servants joining in caroling. The manor opened its doors to the village for a harvest festival, something that hadn't happened in generations. And Eleanor and William's marriage slowly, carefully transformed from partnership into something deeper. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, when William retreated into coldness or Eleanor's defensive walls went up. But they had learned to talk through difficulties rather than retreat into hostile silence. The first time William kissed her, really kissed her, with passion rather than duty, was in the garden on a warm summer evening. They'd been walking after dinner, discussing plans for expanding the village school, when he suddenly stopped and turned to her. "I can't wait any longer," he said. "I need to know if you feel it too. This pull between us." "I feel it," Eleanor admitted, her heart racing. "I'm terrified of it, but I feel it." "Then may I—" She didn't let him finish the question. She rose on her toes and kissed him first, claiming this moment of vulnerability and desire as her own choice rather than his request. William made a sound of surprise, then pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until Eleanor's knees went weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Eleanor Hawke. I love your fire and your courage and your stubborn refusal to accept injustice. I love that you fought for my daughters when I was too broken to fight for them myself. I love everything about you, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You're already worthy," Eleanor whispered. "You became worthy the moment you chose to change, to grow, to let love in instead of keeping it out. Will you let me love you, truly, completely, without reservation?" Eleanor looked at this man who had been her adversary and was now her partner, her friend, and something infinitely more precious. "Yes, I already do." They made love that night for the first time as true partners, not as strangers fulfilling a contract, but as two people who had chosen each other through trial and transformation. It was tender and passionate, and occasionally awkward as they learned each other's bodies and preferences. But it was real, and that made it perfect. The final healing came at Christmas, nearly a year after Eleanor had first arrived at Ashford Manor. The house was transformed. Evergreen boughs draped every banister, candles glowed in every window, and the air smelled of pine and cinnamon and wood smoke. The villagers arrived for the annual celebration that Eleanor had reinstated, bringing music and laughter and children who played with Emily and Sophia without fear. As Eleanor stood in the great hall, watching William dance with both daughters while the household and village celebrated around them, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Miss Pritchard, tears streaming down her face. "Your Grace," the governess said softly, "Lady Catherine would be so happy to see this, so proud of what you've accomplished here." Eleanor squeezed the woman's hand. "We accomplished it together, all of us who refused to let cruelty and fear win. Still, you were the catalyst. You were brave enough to fight when the rest of us had given up." Miss Pritchard smiled through her tears. "You saved this family, Your Grace. Saved all of us, really." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "We saved each other. That's how it works when people choose love over fear." William appeared at her side, slightly breathless from dancing. "The girls are demanding you join us. Something about teaching me the proper way to spin without getting dizzy." Eleanor laughed and allowed herself to be pulled onto the makeshift dance floor. As she spun between William and the girls, surrounded by music and light and genuine joy, she thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived at this house a year ago. That woman had believed she was nothing more than a transaction, a sacrifice to save her family. But she had been so much more. She had been a catalyst, a warrior, a healer. She had refused to accept the cold marriage they'd tried to force on her, and in her refusal, she had transformed everything: the house, the family, herself, and the broken man who had tried to make her just another silent duchess. The music swelled, and William pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on us, for being stubborn and brave and everything I didn't know I needed." "Thank you for learning to love again," Eleanor whispered back, "for letting me teach you that warmth isn't weakness." "It's the strongest thing in the world," William agreed. Stronger than all my walls and rules and rigid control, love broke me open and made me better. As they danced, Eleanor caught sight of Catherine's portrait through the library doorway. In the candlelight, it almost seemed like the painted woman was smiling wider, approving of the life and love filling her former home. "She's here with us," Eleanor said softly. "Catherine, she'd want this. The laughter, the warmth, the healing. She'd want you to be happy too," William replied. "Deliriously, completely happy." "Are you, Eleanor? Are you happy here, with me, with this chaotic, beautiful mess we've made?" Eleanor looked around at the scene, at Emily and Sophia teaching village children to dance, at Miss Pritchard chatting warmly with the new housekeeper, at the servants and villagers mingling without barriers of class or suspicion, at the man holding her close and looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I'm happy. For the first time in my life, I'm completely, impossibly happy." The celebration continued late into the night. Children eventually fell asleep by the fire, wrapped in blankets and still clutching toys from the gift exchange. The village men gathered around the punch bowl, telling stories and laughing. The women clustered near the piano, singing carols in harmony. And when the last guest had finally departed and the household settled into peaceful sleep, Eleanor and William stood together by the window of their shared chambers, looking out over the frost-covered grounds. "It's beautiful," Eleanor murmured. "Even in winter, it's beautiful now." "It was always beautiful," William said. "I just couldn't see it through my grief and anger." "You taught me how to see again, Eleanor, how to feel, how to live instead of just existing." "We taught each other," Eleanor corrected. "You learned warmth from me. I learned strength from you. We're better together than we could ever be apart." William turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I have something for you. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but I can't. I need you to have it now." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not the cold sapphire engagement ring that had marked their arranged marriage, but a new one. A warm golden band set with a deep red ruby surrounded by small diamonds that caught the candlelight like stars. "This is a promise," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not a contract or an arrangement or a business transaction. A promise that I choose you, every day, for the rest of our lives. That I will love you, honor you, protect you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. That our marriage is no longer cold but burning bright with everything we've built together." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as William slipped the new ring onto her finger beside the old one. The contrast was stark: cold blue sapphire and warm red ruby, duty and love, what they had been and what they had become. "I promise the same," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "To choose you, to love you, to build this life together, to keep fighting for warmth and joy and truth, no matter what darkness tries to creep back in." They kissed, sealing the promises they had made not at an altar a year ago, but here in the privacy of their home, with the full weight of understanding what those promises truly meant. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Eleanor's head on William's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, she thought about journeys and transformations, about how the worst moments of her life had somehow led to the best, about how being sold into a cold marriage had given her a family worth fighting for, a purpose worth pursuing, and a love deeper than any romance novel could capture. "What are you thinking?" William asked, his voice drowsy. "That I would do it all again," Eleanor said. "Every terrible moment, every fight, every fear, because it led to this, to you and Emily and Sophia, to this ridiculous manor full of warmth and chaos and love. Even Lady Pemberton trying to poison you. Even that, because it forced you to see the truth, to change, to become the man I fell in love with." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? Forged in crisis, strengthened by scandal, bound by battles." William laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The ton calls you the fearless Duchess, but I know the truth. You were terrified every step of the way. You just refused to let fear stop you." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Eleanor quoted. "It's moving forward despite it. Someone wise told me that once." "Who?" You did. About 3 months ago when I was worried about the villagers accepting me. Did I? William smiled. I'm occasionally wise, then. Broken clocks and all that. They fell silent, comfortable in each other's presence. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and clean, covering the grounds in fresh whiteness. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, managing the estate, raising the girls, navigating society's expectations. But they would face those challenges together, no longer adversaries but partners in the truest sense. Eleanor's last thought before sleep claimed her was of Catherine's diary, locked away safely in William's desk. That record of pain and slow death had become the key to their salvation. Catherine's suffering had not been in vain. It had illuminated the darkness and demanded justice. It had forced change where complacency had reigned. And in a strange way, Catherine had given them the greatest gift, the truth. The truth that had torn them apart and rebuilt them stronger. The truth that perfect facades hide terrible realities. The truth that love requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Eleanor slept peacefully for the first time since arriving at Ashford Manor, secure in William's arms, surrounded by warmth in a house that had once been defined by its coldness. The cold marriage had become a true partnership. The hostile household had become a home. The broken family had been reborn, stronger and truer for having been shattered and rebuilt. And the woman who had arrived as nothing more than a transaction had become exactly what the manor needed. Not a perfect duchess, but a real one. Flawed, fierce, and fearlessly committed to building a life worth living. The fearless duchess had won more than justice or vindication. She had won something infinitely more valuable, a family born not of blood or arrangement, but of choice and courage, and the transformative power of love that refuses to surrender to darkness. As dawn broke over Ashford Manor on that Christmas morning, light streamed through windows that had once been shuttered against joy. And in that light, everything that had been frozen began finally to thaw. The journey from cold marriage to warm family was complete. But the story of Eleanor and William, of Emily and Sophia, of a house reborn from grief and corruption, that story was only beginning. And it would be a beautiful one.